all voices can be heard without interruption. Thank you for respectful, safe, and welcoming for everyone. For those planning to vote on campus, advanced polling will be open on October 10th to 11th and 15th to 16th from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. Please make sure your voice is heard. Now let me briefly explain the structure of tonight's debate. Each candidate will debate against others in their respective ridings. Each candidate will have 15 minutes of speaking time to answer 5 questions. They'll have up to 3 minutes per answer, which will be indicated by our assistant moderator, and can request a 1-minute rebuttal by raising their R sign. This rebuttal...
We would make sure that the price of groceries weren't going higher than the value of groceries. The
BC Greens are proposing to do this by making sure that we have a basic income in place for farmers so that we can actually support them every day so that they can focus on growing food for us here in BC. I think that it's right that we need to make sure that we're looking at local food systems. The BC Greens look for the long term for sustainability. We know that our community's well-being is going to be reliant on food security, now and into the future. So we want to make sure that we are focusing on local food. We're focusing on nonprofit food hubs. I have gone to things like Climate Caucus, which is a group of people that are involved at the municipal level, looking at solutions, looking at how we can build more community food distribution, more cold storage, more food processing so that we have places to distribute food in our community. And obviously we need to address poverty because deep poverty is one of the biggest reasons that people can't afford food in our community. We need to raise the rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Winter. We will now move to our second question. The impacts of climate change are becoming more evident, from wildfires and extreme weather events to shifting ecosystems. The Canadian Climate Institute reports that the area burned by fires across Canada in 2023 was more than 6 times the historical average. Students today are deeply concerned about their future and the long-term effects of the climate crisis. What is your plan to mitigate the effects of climate change, and how will you ensure that BC leads in the transition to a sustainable, low-carbon future? Let's hear from Candidate Winter first.
This is a really gets big breaks that have been legislated and defended by almost every single MLA sitting in the legislature. The BC Greens have been consistent in fighting for climate action and keeping it on the agenda. And how do we get that done? We need to make sure in the next legislature that there are enough BC Greens elected to keep BC progressive. It's a very interesting election. I took political science and history here at UVic, so it's very interesting to me. I look at a lot of different races. There's independent MLAs whose party collapsed on them. They are multi-term, they've been former cabinet ministers, huge community support, very likely to be elected in this government. We have seen Greens running strongly for up to 4 years, putting their campaigns together and connecting with people on the ground from Kootenay Central, West Van, Sea to Sky, up and down Vancouver Island. We are ready to send a strong contingent into a legislature that the 2 status quo parties looks like it's going to be hard for either of them to actually form a majority. And in a minority government, the BC Greens are ready to keep government honest, accountable, and progressive, and make sure that we get real action on climate, that we get a new climate action plan that has measurable actions in it, that we stop missing every single climate target or just moving them. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Winter. We will now hear from Candidate Crooks.
Yeah, well, I think we need to nationalize the resource industries, and we need to prioritize renewable energy and conservation. And when you get pushback on this from people in the industry who say, what about those jobs? Well, it's easy. We need to just retrain those jobs into more green energy and green technology. We need to absolutely cancel taxpayer subsidies to the LNG industry. It's ridiculous that we are paying these private corporations out of our own pocket to pollute and ruin our environment. We also need to think more about how people get around. I read recently that it's around 10% of global energy-related CO2 emissions come from private automobiles. Now, the Canadian government just put a 100% tariff on electric vehicles coming from China. Those electric vehicles would have cost $13,000. The average one in Canada now costs $80,000. Well, you know, our country has for a long time been getting out of producing things. And so the way that corporations in Canada make money are largely on finance. They're getting people into debt and making them pay extra interest on those debts to make money. So we need to rethink our whole economy. We need people coming out of school who know how to build things. We need engineers, we need carpenters. And we need to start having people build things like housing, like building hospitals. If we really want people to come out of school educated and ready to work in the workforce, well, they need jobs, but they also need to not be saddled with incredible amounts of debt that they may be paying off for the rest of their life. I think we need to move away from the corporatization of education. Education is a human right. It's not a privilege. There are other places in the world, let alone places like Cuba that are socialist, there are capitalist countries where they don't pay tuition. So why is one of the richest countries in the world paying tuition? I think that we need to talk about canceling all student debt and removing tuition fees, and even providing a stipend to students who are going to school so that they can pay for a place to live and they can pay for their food. Now, this may sound utopian, but like I said, this happens in other capitalist countries. So why doesn't it happen here? It's because, again, we are beholden to the banks so they can keep making money off us, off of those loans and off of that interest. I have a lot of, I've spoken to a lot of people. I'm from Manitoba originally, and I've spoken to people in Manitoba who wanted to do their PhD work in things like agriculture, and what happens is they end up doing a bunch of free research for companies like Monsanto, and then they don't even own that stuff, and then when they come out of school and they try to get a job at a place like Monsanto, Monsanto goes, no, it's okay, we got your research for free when you were a student. So we really need to take corporations out of education. Again, I'll repeat it, education is a human right, it's not a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Crooks. We will now hear from Candidate Winter.
I agree with so much of what was just said. We have seen long-term structural underinvestment in education, and that definitely includes post-secondary education. You know, the corporatization, financialization, all of the things that schools are asked to do in order to be able to run. And, you know, this is something that has really changed anymore. You know, people go for a practicum, and these are unpaid practicums. We need to change that. We need to start paying for people to take their practicums because their landlord doesn't care that they're, you know, not getting paid for the full-time work that they're doing. And if they're having to hold down a second job to pay all of those expenses, that's not a great way to get trained to be a nurse. That's not a great way to be trained to be a teacher. We need to address that urgently. And we also need to make sure that we work on affordable housing so that there's more housing options available for students. I understand that Camosun College is finally going to get student housing on campus. It's something that's being expanded on UVic here. It's a way that we can make sure that there's enough housing support for students, which will help with overall affordability.
Thank you, Candidate Winter. With that, we will move to our fourth question. In British Columbia, almost half of respondents to a 2021 Statistics Canada survey reported difficulty accessing healthcare services, and 14% said they had not received all the healthcare services they required. Shortages of family doctors, long wait times for diagnoses, and limited mental health services are pressing issues. What is your plan to ensure that all constituents, including students, have timely access to comprehensive health care? We will hear from Candidate Winter first.
I can't remember the last time that I was able to actually walk into a walk-in clinic. Now, they have extremely long wait times for appointments that you may or may not be able to get into, or it's show up at some extremely early hour in the morning, or just go to the emergency room and hope that it's only going to be a 4 or 5 hour wait instead of over 12. But this is something that we actually can't wait on, and we need to work with a model that works. We've seen a lot of spending increasing on healthcare. You know, the healthcare budget has gone from $20 billion to $33 billion, and yet I don't see a great improvement in access to primary care, to a basic family doctor, to the ability to, get these basic healthcare services as well as mental health care services. BC Greens want to focus on a model that works for communities, that has been proven to work here in BC, but that is not being supported right now with the way that the bureaucracy is set up, which is community health centers, which is actually people who practice medicine, different healthcare practitioners coming together in an integrated model so that we can have family doctors, nurse practitioners, psychologists, nutritionists, all own teams, not having it dictated by the health administration, not having it said, we need you to, pay back in for the administrative system, but actually just able to build the teams that work in their community. We also need to make sure that we urgently cover mental health care. I mean, this is something that the BC Greens back in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, when we talked to experts, they said, look, this is going to be a mass mental health epidemic. Effectively, this is going to have a huge impact on so many people in our community. We need to be getting ahead of this. So we suggested and put forward a bill that said, let's cover psychologists for everyone in BC under MSP for at least 6 visits a year. Let's give people that early preventative care so that they don't get so far gone that their mental health problems are compounded, that maybe they also are now struggling with addiction issues, that maybe they have more health issues in general than they had in the first place that impedes their ability to recover and become well. We want to make sure that we not only include that for everybody, that we really focus on building a voluntary mental health care system, one where when people ask for help, they get it. They don't get put on a wait list. They don't get told, well, we'll get back to you in a few weeks. They get help when they need it, and when they're ready, or when somebody needs help, we have a 4th option on 911. So it isn't just police, ambulance, fire, but that the appropriate mental health response can come to really give people the help that they need, supporting community-based action teams. I've seen how this works in my own life. I live on Warwick Street, just on the edge of Quadra Village, have seen people in distress, have called AVI services and had their community team come out and be extremely successful. We need to spend money where it matters in healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Winter. We will now hear from Candidate Crooks.
Access to healthcare is a problem all over the province. We need to be trained.
Thank you, Candidate Crooks. We will now invite Candidate Winter to provide the rebuttal. You have 1 minute to address the points raised during the debate and share your perspective.
This isn't going to be much of a rebuttal because I actually agree with a lot of what Candidate Crooks just said, but I just wanted to mention that in addition to training more healthcare workers, we have to make sure that we have a system that retains people that are already trained, because my friends who are nurses and healthcare workers for many, many, many years have told me that the working conditions within the system are completely unsustainable. So we are losing people to burnout. We are losing people to physical and mental health conditions that they have to take time off work to deal with. We need a system that healthcare workers can stay in. We need to implement all of the recommendations that the nurses have already made of how to fix the system.
Thank you for your rebuttal, Candidate Winter. We will now continue with the regularly structured debate. We're moving to our 5th question. British Columbia is facing an unprecedented housing affordability crisis as rent prices continue to soar. Rental.ca's most recent renters report indicate that the average asking price for a rental has increased by 9.6% in the past year. The UVSS, alongside 4 other student unions in BC, is encouraging students to consider candidates' positions on vacancy control. Do you support vacancy control or rent control measures in BC? If not, how do you plan to tackle the escalating cost of housing across the province? Candidate Crooks, you have the podium first.
Yeah, first of all, I'll just start by saying yes, we do agree with vacancy control. In fact, our party is currently involved in a new coalition called the BC Housing Action Coalition, and we are starting a campaign to put pressure on whoever wins government in this election to put in place vacancy control so that rents are tied to the units and not to the renter, and that will disincentivize landlords from kicking out people so they can raise the rents. Canada has actually, as has the provincial government, has actually admitted that housing is a human right, but it can't be a human right and a commodity at the same time. So we need to demand an end to housing speculation. For too long, the answer by the government to address the housing crisis has been to give more and more money to private corporations to build houses. With these, they say if we'll give you money and you have to have a certain amount of affordable units in your building. Well, what affordable means varies in different situations. Sometimes it is tied to the market price. So that's not really affordable if it's tied to a market price that is already way too high. And often these deals also end within 20 years. So after one person lives in that unit for the length of that stay, then the price goes up again. We need to build 100,000 units, but they need to be publicly owned. We need to ban rent evictions and dem evictions and abolish sweeps against unhoused people using tents for emergency housing needs. And I want to talk about in Helsinki. 1 in 7 people in Helsinki, Finland live in public housing. The government owns 80% of the land in that city, and they own their own construction company, so they're building their own housing. In Vienna, 60% of people live in social housing.
Term action, we want to ban REITs from owning residential properties. The way that we've proposed doing it in this platform is by introducing a property transfer tax that specifically applies to them to disincentivize them immediately. While we are advocating with the federal government for legislation, if we have to, I want to make sure that we find every avenue to get REITs out of the residential real estate market. We also want to make sure that, public land is for public housing, that government supports nonprofits, that they get first right of refusal on any affordable rental housing building that comes up, that they get full
Hi everyone, we're gonna get started again, so if you can just make your way back to your seats, that would be awesome. Oh, thank you. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Great, thanks so much. So next we have the Victoria Beacon Hill riding that contains most of downtown Victoria. For this section, only one candidate was able to attend, so we extend our welcome to Grace Lohr. Grace was first elected was first elected the MLA for Victoria Beacon Hill in 2020 and has been British Columbia's Minister of Children and Family Development, BC's Minister of State for Childcare, and the Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity. She taught in the Department of Political Science at the University of Victoria and the University of British Columbia, teaching Canadian politics, gender and politics, statistics, and research methods. Grace has raised her family in Victoria Beacon Hill in the Fernwood neighborhood. Sonia Firstino, who is also running in the Victoria Beacon Hill riding, was unable to be here tonight and has a message to share. Thank you for being here tonight. She would like to start by letting you know that Sonia Firstino, your BC Green candidate for Victoria Beacon Hill, really wanted to be here. She's been busy preparing for the CBC Leaders Debate, which is happening tomorrow in Vancouver. The debate is an important opportunity for Sonia to ensure that a progressive Green voice is heard across the province. Even though she can't be here in person, she asked that we share just how much the BC Greens value education and care about the issues students face. Sonia went to UVic for all 3 of her degrees, so she knows this campus and understands what it's like to be a student here. Her time at UVic shaped her views on sustainability, community, and justice, values driving her leadership today. One of the big focuses for Sonia and the BC Greens is ensuring education is affordable and accessible. They've seen successful models in countries like Denmark, where higher education is tuition-free and students are supported with living stipends. It's not just a dream, this could be our reality too if we start putting people and education first instead of always prioritizing GDP growth and industries that don't serve our communities. The BC Greens believe that investing in people, especially students, is the best way to build a future where everyone can thrive. They know how hard it is right now for students to balance school, work, and living expenses and are committed to making sure no one has to graduate under a mountain of debt. They would also like you to tune in tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. on CBC to watch the Leaders Debate. Thank you, Sonia Firstino, for that message. And since candidate Lohr is the only candidate in attendance for this riding, there will be no rebuttals allowed. Without further delay, we will begin with the first question. In the midst of an affordability crisis, students and families are increasingly struggling with food insecurity. A 2023 BC CDC report shows that 12.3% of island residents struggle with a form of food insecurity, an increase from the previous 2016 report. When factoring in rising living costs and inflation, access to affordable, nutritious food is becoming more difficult for many. What specific measures will you take to address food insecurity, particularly for students and low-income families? Candidate Lohr may share her response.
Good evening, everyone. Really, really nice to be here. Nice to join you on the territory of the Lekwungen people of the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation, as well as the Wasanich peoples. What if I mess up and need a rebuttal on myself? Really, really appreciate this question. I know so many Students, families are feeling the pressure of high cost of living, of global inflation, of high interest rates, the impact on food prices and housing. Certainly something I heard as when I was teaching here at UVic, and certainly something I hear in my community office from families. And there's absolutely a critical role to play for government here. One of the things that we did over the last year and a bit was invest in food security for communities. $200 million that includes really important grants to strengthen food banks, food security, food access, food distribution, and providing some of that particularly to underserved community partners through food banks and the United Way. And some of the things I want to say locally for Victoria Beacon Hill, some of the support went through the Fernwood NRG, for example, Fata Care, an incredible mobile food bank that I just have all the time in the world for, and much more. In terms of supporting food security for low-income families, our government invested in the largest expansion of school food programs. That's $214 million. Purchasing food, hiring dedicated staff to coordinate, and we know what it means to kids when they have access to good, healthy, nutritious food in the classroom, what it means for connection, stability, learning, etc. I've seen this in my kids' school. My kids go to George J. I've seen what it means for families to access that food security. There's also a lot, we've doubled down, by the way, on the food schools in our school foods program in our platform, because we've got to do more. There's also some really exciting work happening around supporting local food production. That's climate action, it's food security, and it addresses some of the costs. So that is helping to avoid the exchange rates, the transportation. These things have an impact on the climate and on the cost of food. So my commitment to keep working as MLA, but also in the previous role I had as MCFD minister for that support for low-income families, access to food security, and making sure that the community partners who are really delivering this are able to effective. Feels like question period.
Thank you, Candidate Lohr. Moving to our next question. The impacts of climate change are becoming more evident, from wildfires and extreme weather events to shifting ecosystems. The Canadian Climate Institute reports that the area burned by fires across Canada in 2023 was more than 6 times the historical average. Students today are deeply concerned about their future and the long-term effects of the climate crisis. What is your plan to mitigate the effects of climate change, and how will you ensure that BC leads in the transition to a sustainable, low-carbon future? Let's hear from Candidate Lohr.
Thank you. So this election is a bit weird in that we're actually debating and litigating things I thought we had all collectively kind of settled on. Science, human rights, and one of those is climate change. So climate change is real, the science is real, the need to act is real. Although I suppose we would be debating it if the BC Conservatives had showed up. But in the absence of that, our province does have the most ambitious climate plan in the country, and it's at risk. I feel deep anxiety about this election in a few different buckets. One of them is climate. We need to make sure that we are moving forward on this. So we canceled the deep well oil subsidy, the biggest subsidy, oil and gas caps, net zero on all new projects. And one of the things that I'm particularly excited about is we're building that alternative. If we are going to transition, which we must, if we're going to move away, which we must invest in and build the energy alternatives. So we had the first call for clean power in 15 years, and it has a core component of economic reconciliation, of co-ownership with First Nations. We got back 3 times as much power, clean power, as we were expecting with that call to power. So we can build the future we want, we can move towards it, and we can do it with the economic reconciliation as a core component. So despite thinking that we had collectively settled on a few things, we are really facing an election for a government that wants to move forward on clean power, partnered with First Nations, or prioritizing the return of plastic straws and plastic bags and old growth logging. Like, truly, we can build an economic future that has jobs, that has clean power. We have to do it intentionally, and we have to do it together. We have to do it around people, and we have to do it with First Nations. And we don't need plastic bags back. Wish our BC Conservatives were here to have this conversation, because we truly need to have it. That is what's at stake in this election. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Candidate Lohr. Let's now move to our third question. The cost of education continues to rise, placing a significant financial burden on students. According to Statistics Canada, the average student loan debt for a graduating student in BC was over $25,000 in 2018 and 19, the third highest in Canada. How will your government address rising tuition costs and student debt? Candidate Lohr may share her response.
The up and down feels a little bit awkward, but it would be weirder to stand here and wait for the question. So as was mentioned, I spent a number of years teaching here at UVic. I also taught at UBC. I spent a lot of time as a post-secondary student. The pressures on students in my classroom were so intense. This has absolutely been a piece of work for our government. So things like eliminating interest on student loans. Now looking at this feels like a little bit of a no-brainer. Like, how are we charging interest on something that is like supporting a collective good and opportunity? We've increased investment in graduate degree scholarships, invested in open education resources, which is really, really important, and are expanding seats in a number of really critical programs. And we must do that. The folks who are accessing education, who are pursuing degrees, in professions where we all collectively benefit from this. So that investment is really important. If I can, also, a specific component of this, as holding the file for MCFD, I think one of the most important things our government did is support for youth who've spent time in care. Like, in those situations, we know the vulnerabilities. We also have a responsibility, and so youth who've spent significant time in care can access free post-secondary with supports. That had a age cap at one point. We got rid of that because, for anyone, sometimes it takes a while to figure out what you want to do and pursue. So that is something that I am really proud of. In addition to the access to post-secondary, the Strengthening Abilities and Journeys of Empowerment program is now income subsidies, access to mental health care, ability to go to the dentist and get your eyes checked, life skills training, return to community and culture. And again, for youth who've spent time in care, they don't have to be in there on their 19th birthday, and they don't have to be in foster care if they were in the care of auntie or the care of the nation. Train folks. It's also not just doctors. We need all healthcare professionals supported and operating at the top of their skill set. Nurses are amazing. Nurse practitioners are amazing. Pharmacists can now prescribe for minor ailments. In our platform, we plan to expand the scope of practice for midwives, because midwives are amazing. So doctors is key, but expanding access to all sorts of care and making sure that everyone's operating at their full training and is honored with the respect of their profession and the contribution that it has in the community is critical. I think one of the things I want to mention is Foundry. The expansion of Foundry across our province has been like dramatic, and that's access to primary care, gender affirming care, mental health care, and it's like community specific. I went to the one in Campbell River, very different than the one in Kelowna. It's got to be grounded in community. It's got to support youth needs. I also think Clicker is something I just want to bring up in terms of mental health response. Mental health care and things like community mental health support, which our platform again commits to funding, is really critical. And we need to have that emergency response that is not the police. That's not the right response. We are seeing just critical care and response from the community-led crisis response team. So just my ongoing commitment to this work around mental health care, mental health support, access to care, and doing it in a community-centered way. We cannot risk things like the Conservatives on gender-affirming care, on vaccines, again, on science, on the impact on our mental health system, and my commitment to keep pushing that forward.
Thank you, Candidate Lohr. We will now have
600 net new beds here. We're going to get housing for the first time at Camosa, and like this is really critical. Building non-market housing in our communities. Fernwood behind Vic High and James Bay, building non-market housing. We're also building a lot of supportive housing. Like this, we have to do it across the housing spectrum, and protecting the affordable rentals that we've already got. So we worked with the Rental Protection Fund and the Greater Victoria Housing Society. 2 buildings in our community came for sale. Starlight and the REITs buy those up. Resource extraction is like their primary piece. So instead, we bought those buildings together and moved them into the non-market realm. The rent control at inflation or lower. It was at inflation plus 2.5%. Again, I'm deeply anxious that the Conservatives in a community where 65% of folks are renters will get rid of rent control, where we have those levers. They bring back Airbnbs. There are 1,000 units downtown that are now owner-occupied or rented out. That is a huge amount. We cannot let Airbnb and vacant homes back in. These are things we cannot cede ground on. We have to keep going further. And then using our legislative tools around rent evictions, personal use evictions. We keep having to find and push down the places where folks are trying to extract as much as possible. There's a lot more work to do, and I truly believe that we're not going to solve this with a lack of government involvement. We need to protect the progress we've made and push further, so all folks have opportunities for a safe home that works for their family. I'll just, in my half minute before she starts, I was just on a debate, a town hall for survivors of gender-based violence, and the link to housing, absolutely critically clear, and something I won't quit working on should I get the privilege to be in this role for another 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Lohr. This concludes our section for the Victoria Beacon Hill riding. Thank you to Grace Lohr for her valued participation, and with that, you can please move to the seating area. If everyone could take their seats again, we're gonna get started. Great. So lastly, we're going to hear from the candidates from the Oak Bay Gordon Head riding. And first we'll welcome Dr. Lisa Gunderson. She is a psychologist, barrier-breaking community leader, business owner, and equity consultant with a proven track record for representing underserved populations. She is deeply committed to serving people over politics and creating equitable solutions that drive positive change for Oak Bay Gordon Head. She has been a proud resident of Victoria with her family since 2011, with both of her sons graduating from Mount Doug class of 2020 and 2024. We'd also like to welcome Diana Gibson. Diana Gibson has devoted her career to making life better for people. An award-winning community leader and entrepreneur, she led Greater Victoria's Community Social Planning Council and co-founded the Firelight Group, now Canada's largest Indigenous-owned consulting firm. During the pandemic, when many people across Greater Victoria faced financial challenges that threatened their housing, Diana's team at the Community Social Planning Council launched a rent bank for the region. They helped more than 2,000 households keep their homes. Without further ado, we will begin with our questions. In the midst of an affordability crisis, students and families are increasingly struggling with food insecurity. A 2020
have this conversation. 12.3% that have in terms of island residents. In 2023, 9.7% of food bank clients were actually over the age of 65. And that becomes a really important point. We need to invest long-term in food security. That is a must. We have to build a food system that strengthens both the local and regional economies. So let's talk specifically about you all. We want to raise the food crisis grant from $40 a month to $200 a month, and that's going to be able to better support students and other individuals who are facing food insecurity. We also have in our plan for K through 12 to provide every child in BC breakfast and lunch. We know how critically important it is for people to be able to feel good in order to be able to be academically successful. We also are planning on developing a set of policies that are going to facilitate public institutional procurement, meaning that of local food, ensuring schools and universities, they prioritize locally produced food. So that means we get to invest in farmers and farmer markets, community-supported agriculture, nonprofit food hubs like IE Creative. If you haven't seen that, take a look at that. That's a perfect example of a culturally responsive food system right here locally. We want to partner with universities and schools and community organizations and local farmers to promote sustainable practices. So, how many of you know that 50% of our food comes from Cali? Okay, it does. And so we want to invest $9 million to bolster local food systems. We want to support our local farmers by improving access to credit and capital for new farmers to make it really easier for them to start and sustain farming operations. And in addition, we want to support Indigenous communities. We want to support their accessibility to use traditional foods and to invest in Indigenous food sovereignty programs. We believe that it's critically important for you all to be able to have access to food. So don't forget, November 5th, you all can get a free hot lunch right here at UVic from 10:30 to 1.
Thank you, Candidate Gunderson. We will now hear from Candidate Gibson.
Make this taller here. Hi, folks. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. It's my great pleasure to be here. Starting with this question is really stark. We do see food bank usage going up, particularly with also, although Lisa mentioned seniors, also families. And it's something that with global inflation and high food prices has been a real concern for me. And as somebody who calculated the living wage for the region, I know one of the biggest instruments for tackling food security always is incomes, and people are going hungry and using food banks because they're not earning enough money or are getting enough income. So the BC NDP government took our minimum wage from the bottom in the country to the top in the country and tied it to inflation. And that's certainly a commitment we have to continuing. The Conservative government was, Restad, when using with the Liberals, were the ones that brought it to the bottom in the country, and they would do that again. That is their MO, in a sort of open for business approach to our province. And we need to ensure that people's incomes are decent and can sustain individuals and families in such a way that they don't need to be relying on food banks. Certainly investing in ensuring that we have a strong economy is part of that too, so that we have wages. And right now we have some of the highest wages in the country. And that's because the NDP government has been ensuring that we have good public sector jobs with quality working conditions and wages. And that's a critical part of addressing food security as well. And another thing that we need to know about food security is, as Lisa mentioned, it's tied somewhat to our agricultural land and our food production. And we saw that during the pandemic. We're on an island. We're on an island that's headed in the middle of what is becoming very clearly a climate crisis as well. Of course, it's clear that we're seeing that volatility in our climate impacting our food and our food security. So ensuring that we have protection of our agricultural land reserves and that we're not facilitating urban sprawl that eats up our agricultural land. And that's something, again, that the Conservative government would do. It would encourage sprawl by limiting urban development and housing and leaving it to the market. And we've seen what that looks like, where our forests are being mowed down and our agricultural lands being eaten up. And we need to ensure that that's protected. We build smart, climate-friendly urban communities while we protect our agricultural areas for food security, and we help our agricultural sector to be climate resilient. And the NDP platform has a whole agricultural strategy that's focusing on food security on the island and on our climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Gibson. We will now move to our second question. The impacts of climate change are becoming more evident, from wildfires and extreme weather events to shifting ecosystems. The Canadian Climate Institute reports that the areas burned by fires across Canada in 2023 was more than 6 times the historical average. Students today are deeply concerned about their future and the long-term effects of the climate crisis. What is your plan to mitigate the effects of climate change, and how will you ensure that BC leads in the transition to a sustainable, low-carbon future? Let's hear Candidate Gibson's response first.
Back to back, Diana, here we go. Climate change is something that I've recently been working on with our municipal governments, and it's really important for folks to recognize that, as Grace said, we are in an election where we're having a conversation we should never be having in 2024 about whether climate crisis is an urgent crisis, whether or not climate science is real. And we shouldn't be having this conversation at all, but we are. It's very disappointing that we are. There is really a choice right now on the other side of this election for everyone of two premiers. There is going to be one of two parties running this province. And Rastad's government, he has clearly stated many times, made statements that show he does not believe we should be taking action on the climate crisis, that Conservatives will be ramping up oil and gas production, that they will be undoing the conservation strategy. When asked about our 30% by 2030 conservation strategy, Rastad said, it's nonsense. What if we want a log? So we know what that perspective means for us at this moment in history with the climate crisis. Later is too late. We don't have time to go backwards. The NDP government has had a bold climate action strategy. Even without the carbon tax, we've got the strongest climate action strategy in North America, and we'll continue to be investing in climate action directly and through regulatory tools, which are even more effective than things like subsidies and tax incentives, so things like a cap on oil and gas emissions, and also through building the clean economy. We had a call for proposals for renewable energy that was threefold oversubscribed. There's incredible potential.
During the debate and share your perspective.
I just want to make it clear that when you all see the leadership debate tomorrow, you're going to see three leaders there. There are three leaders, and it's very, very important for us to remember that. You also have three choices here in this election. And in 2017, the Greens held the balance of power. And it's because of those three MLAs that the NDP actually has their Clean BC plan. And that was part of the CASA agreement. And so we want to understand that during this particular election, when we have two groups doing this, that there are a set of Green persons who you can vote for, who will be a caucus, who actually can hold that balance of power. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Candidate Gunderson. We will now continue with the regular structured debate. The cost of education continues to rise, placing a significant financial burden.
I did answer the climate question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Well, let's hear Candidate Gunderson's answer to this question.
This is a question I don't want to miss. I think Diana's right when she says we're having conversations that we shouldn't be having. And that includes conversations around having fossil fuels. We cannot have a fossil fuel future. We have to progress toward a fossil-free future. That means no more fracking, period. It means no new LNG projects. It means no new pipelines, no new fracking wells. If we are serious about climate, there's no way you can be serious about it and end up funding and subsidizing oil and gas. That makes no sense. We need to end all subsidies, and we have this in our policy proposal. We need to end all subsidies and public financing for fossil fuel infrastructure. We need to end discounted electricity rates for LNG. They receive $5 billion in government support. That is unacceptable. We are not going to reach our targets if we continue that way. We also now need to review and update climate pollution targets because we are off, and so we need to regularly look at climate science, which is a real thing, and we need to look at that as it evolves. We want to establish urban tree canopy targets as well, and we want to save our old growth forests. So that means that we're not going to anymore clear cut any type of industrial logging. We're going to stop clear-cutting industrial logging. We are going to fully fund the protection of old forests, and we're going to compensate the First Nations for any lost revenues that they're going to have due to the deferral of that. Let's talk a minute about the carbon tax. Internationally, we know that is one of the single most important things that you can do. They shouldn't have ended the carbon tax. What they should have done is they should have fixed it. And what that means is they should have required the oil and gas industry and the big polluters to pay their fair share, which they did not do. 65% of the industrial emissions they actually exempted them. 65%. That was money that was taken directly out of our pocket. In addition, they're now hurting lowest income earners in BC, because if you were a low income earner, you were receiving $500 to $1,000 in a carbon tax rebate, and now that is gone. We cannot have a future where we are having these discussions. So I agree, there are some conversations I can't believe we're still having. You cannot approve new LNG terminals and pipelines while pretending to act on climate change. We just need people to pay their fair share. I'm so sorry about this.
It's not your fault. That's all right. Thank you very much, Candidate Gunderson. We will now move to our third question. The cost of education continues to rise, placing a significant financial burden on students. According to Statistics Canada, the average student loan debt for a graduating student in BC was over $25,000 in 2018 and 19, the third highest in Canada. How will your government address rising tuition costs and student debt? Candidate Gunderson, you have the podium.
Oh, this is close to my heart. I taught my first class in 1995. I was a tenured professor. Wow, that was like almost 30 years ago, which I'm old. Hopefully I'm aging like a fine wine. I think it's incredibly important, and our plan is to make sure that every BC resident, regardless of their income, has the ability to access higher education and trades if indeed they want to. So what that means is we have had an increase in operating grants. We're going towards a knowledge economy, but we're still not spending enough money on post-secondary education. And using international student tuition rates to do that is neither appropriate nor sustainable in any way. Funding has not kept pace with inflation. And so what we would like to do is first increase the amount students can receive through the BC Access Grant and extend eligibility to graduate students to reduce financial barriers. Second, we want to collaborate with Student Aid BC to expand that list of professionals who are going to be eligible for things like student loan forgiveness, targeting certain types of occupations, but like my colleague said, Christina, that we want to make sure that list stays open. Do we have anybody in here who might be an early childhood educator or a teaching student? Possibly? Okay, great. So we want to provide paid final practicums for teachers and ECEs, offering financial support for you when you are doing your essential training period, because you're going to definitely need that. We also want to create a dedicated funding stream to First Nations mandated institutions. We want to provide Indigenous language programming and culturally relevant education for Indigenous students. I do clinical work. I'm the clinical supervisor and practicum coordinator for UVic students and master's students at the Wasanich school system. And that is one of the few systems where we're pre-K through grade 12 that does Sinchothan in English. So these are students who are learning both of those languages. And it's going to be incredibly important for them when they graduate to be able to come into university and not have to worry about money. We also want to invest $20 million annually for education and training programs to address the skills shortage that we're going to see and that we have right now in the renewable energy sector. And we also want to retrain oil and gas workers. We have got to understand that if we are going to move forward in a successful way, we have to make sure we have a well-funded, well-educated society. And we want to do that without you all having to pay the brunt of that.
Thank you, Candidate Gunderson. We will now hear from Candidate Gibson.
Hi, folks. Well, this is probably close to the heart of everybody in this room. I have 2 students in university right now, and one heading that direction next year. And I can tell you, affordability, tuition, student debt are top of mind for me as a parent as well. And so that was why I was really happy to see the interest off of our student loans. Certainly, at least knowing your student loans aren't going to continue accruing interest, particularly for those that struggle after graduation, is huge. And in contrast, once again, with the Conservative government, Rastad, when in government, voted against removing the interest off of student loans. So the contrast you have again before you is of a premier who has taken the interest off student loans and continues to invest in education, and one that cut education and refused to support the move to take interest off student loans. It's a really important decision to be made this election for education. I've heard the Conservatives talk about job training and investing in education as kind of a focus on employability, and that's really signaling to me a lack of understanding of the importance of our post-secondary education. That's where people get the critical skills and the opportunity to learn and explore in such a way that for us, with a future where AI is coming in, we know so many questions about what jobs are going to be relevant, what are the career paths of the future. We can't afford to be narrowing our education down to skills training for jobs that might not exist. We need to be investing in post-secondary and continuing to do that. We also do need to be investing in our skills and trades training, because we are leaning into that renewable transition, and we are making that transition to a low carbon economy. You don't flip a switch and have that happen overnight. It's something that has to be done through building our renewable sector, investing in transitions for our rural communities, and building the workforce we need to be able to make that transition to a renewable economy. We're building that through our Future Skills Grant, through doubling our apprenticeship programs. And then we've done a lot of other things to help with student debt, which includes things like capping rent increases and helping with affordability measures like auto insurance being under control, hydro rates, a renter rebate, and a $1,000 grocery rebate. So many different places where this government is invested in affordability to help students and households, but also investing in education and the future so that we can have a creative, educated populace that are excited about the new economy that's coming.
Thank you, Candidate Gibson. With that, we will move to our 4th question. In British Columbia, almost half of respondents to a 2021 Statistics Canada survey reported difficulty accessing healthcare services, and 14% said they had not received all the healthcare services they required. Shortages of family doctors, long wait times for diagnoses, and limited mental health services are pressing issues. What is your plan to ensure that all constituents, including students, have timely access to comprehensive health care? We will hear from Candidate Gibson first.
On this one, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, surprise, surprise, the contrast with the Conservatives. But this one's really close to my heart because I worked for 10 years at a research institute where I focused on health policy. And I was in Alberta. And we really have experience in Alberta with healthcare privatization. One example is the hip and knee clinic. The government decided that if they got private business to centralize and do all our knee surgeries in one place for profit, it would be faster and better. So they offered this contract to a private contractor, and they took on our hip and knee surgeries. And then they decided that there was so much business they were going to grow and grow, and then they overexpanded and went bankrupt. And we were left with nobody doing our hip and knee surgeries. It is not a solution to talk about privatization for healthcare. Our big challenge right now in healthcare is human resources, people. We're short doctors, we're short nurses, we're short all sorts of healthcare practitioners. So creating a parallel system when you have a shortage does not increase that supply of healthcare workers. What does is things like building the first new medical college in 50 years, and the NDP just did that. It means renegotiating how doctors are paid and clinics are run so that the doctors can get back to the business of being doctors. And we've done that. And we just took 250,000 people off the wait list this year for family doctors with that new change. And there's more off that list every day. It is critical that we continue to offer universal health care and not health care for people where and when they can pay, but health care for us where and when we need it. And those two things are not compatible. If you have a private pay system, it will cream off the healthiest patients and offer them services they don't need because they can pay for it, and the wait lists will get longer for all of the rest of us. It is critical that we watch that decision that has to be made once again between a premier who has a history of cutting healthcare, which Rustad did deeply cut healthcare, and wants to privatize our healthcare system and make it be there for people who can pay, or a premier who's built the first medical training college in 50 years, is bringing new hospitals and doctors to our province and all healthcare professionals, and is ready to work across the system to make sure healthcare's there for everyone when they need it. I'm committed to making that happen on the other side of this election, and there's too much at stake to let that be in the hands of the Conservatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Gibson. We will now hear from Candidate Gunderson.
How many of you do not have a doctor? Okay. Notice my hand is raised as well. My family does not have a family doctor. And you know what it's like to call at 7:59 in the morning and fingers crossed that you get through at 8:02 in the morning, and then to find out that, oh, you're not going to be able to be seen today. I absolutely agree. We cannot go towards privatization of healthcare. And something that my colleague Camille Curry, who is running at Esquimalt, if you all seen those signs, everyone deserves a family doctor. Have you seen that? Yeah, that's Camille Curry. And one of the things she says is, you know, we don't really have as much of a supply issue, that we have people who are not interested in coming and working in our particular space. So Sonia has talked about, and we're talking about a solution. It's called the Dogwood model. And this is already a proven model, and it offers several advantages for both us as patients and for practitioners. I want you all to think about it like how you're in your neighborhood and you have like a catchment school. Well, it's a similar thing. We are proposing that every riding will have a community health center in the first year. And that community health center, when you go in it, has actually a doctor or nurse practitioner and other professionals.
As rent prices continue to soar. Rental.ca's most recent renters report indicates that the average asking price for a rental has increased by 9.6% in the past year. The UVSS, alongside 4 other student unions in BC, is encouraging students to consider candidates' positions on vacancy control. Do you support vacancy control or rent control measures in BC? And if not, how do you plan to tackle the escalating cost of housing across the province? Candidate Gunderson may share their response.
When you look at our plan, you're going to see it focuses on a particular set of groups: seniors, students, families, and renters. I'm a renter. I feel like I'm in a lot of these categories, you know? And one of the things you need to recognize is we are literally paying for 40 years of not putting in funding into non-market housing. We're the recipients now of that. And so we are proposing 26,000 new units of non-market housing annually. We're going to put $1.5 billion into that annually. 3,000 of those units specifically for Indigenous communities. We're going to be supporting nonprofits. We're going to be supporting cooperatives with grant, capital, and upfront investment. How are we going to pay for that? I want you all to look at our platform, because everything I've spoken about tonight, we tell you how we're going to pay for that. We have a whole section just dedicated to that. We also are going to collaborate with construction associations, because we need people to build. And many times, young people, women, and Indigenous and other racialized communities don't think about this as a viable opportunity. And so we are going to be promoting trades as a career option and also help with the tuition. The question was, do we support vacancy control? Absolutely. And I believe we are the only party that does. We want vacancy control. We want to prevent landlords from dramatically increasing your rent when you go from one space to another. I literally get anxiety every 6 months or so because I'm not quite sure if my landlord is going to rent evict me or what's going to happen. Vacancy control is imperative. And not only are we interested in giving you vacancy control, we're interested in having vacancy control in assisted living facilities for seniors, so they don't have to worry when they are moving on fixed incomes, worrying about that increase in rent skyrocketing for them as well. It is imperative that we understand that housing is a right. Housing is a right. And we cannot have a market answer how we're going to fix this problem. That is not going to work for us. Thank you. And thank you all for your time today.
Thank you, Candidate Gunderson. We will now hear from Candidate Gibson.
Once again, this is something very close to my heart because I have young adults in my life who are struggling to find housing, and I know the importance of housing affordability so many people are struggling with. Vacancy control will not lower existing rents. Vacancy control will not change or lower the price of new housing. The thing that will is bringing on a lot more housing stock. And the idea that that can only be done through non-market is not realistic. It is clear right now with the state of this housing crisis that we need to pull every lever we have to bring new housing in. And that includes ensuring that the action this government's done, like changing zoning regulations and helping to reduce regulatory burdens so that folks can get housing built in municipalities, and making changes around heavily investing in nonprofit, non-market housing, and co-ops, which are very close to my heart. My mom worked for a food cooperative, so very close. I love the co-ops. We need a lot more of them. We had a lot more when I was growing up. That, as Lisa said, those decades of lack of investment in housing and having a lot from housing density has meant we've had sprawl and we've had no housing built. So the actions that are needed is a lot more measures, a full suite. This government has a suite of measures from doubling the speculation tax, working and continuing to keep Airbnbs out, and ensuring that stock is in the market, and for renters, and a suite of other measures, but also ensuring that we're taking action to protect existing affordable stock so that we do minimize that risk of REITs coming in and evicting folks, capping rent increases to inflation. And we do have rent control on existing tenancies, which this province has implemented and has helped keep rents down, ensuring we help fight unfair evictions, rent evictions, and protect existing housing. So we need to get a lot more homes built so we can get that vacancy rate down so that there's housing available for everyone when they need it and we can afford it. And that means pulling every lever. And that, although we know that the market can't do it, the Scotiabank said, even the Scotiabank, not the bastion of left-wing thought, said the market can't do this. We know government needs to be in. The Conservatives said they do not see a role for government in housing and would rip up all of that action and progress. We cannot afford to have the Conservatives take us backwards on our housing strategy. We need to continue progress. And I have seen some vacancy signs. I've been door knocking a lot in this neighborhood, and I've seen some vacancy signs in this community.
Thank you, Candidate Gibson. So this concludes our final section for the Oak Bay Gordon Head riding. I'd like to thank both candidates for your valued participation, and with that you can now please move to the seating area. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks very much. So thank you to all the candidates for their participation, and thank you to everyone who attended tonight. A special thanks as well to the volunteers and staff who made this event possible. And once again, don't forget that advanced polling will take place on October 10th to 11th and 15th to 16th from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. with the general election following shortly after. Some candidates will be available at their party tables at the back of the room if you'd like to engage with them further. And please have a great evening, and thank you again for coming.
I'm just going to add one thing. You have a few more hours in the day, and the end of the day is the voter registration deadline. So if you haven't registered to vote, register to vote today at BC Elections. Thank you. Have a good night.